I'm Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. In this video, I'm going to show you how to solder on a bail, and this is going to be part 1. So, as we start them all, we're getting ready to put a bail on this big, sexy bezel right here that Susie made. Look at it, gorgeous. So, most of the time with a bail, I like to do 2 bails, which, I mean, not really 2 bails. The bail is the part that the chain goes through, and then I have a smaller jump ring because you can fix the bail just rigid right onto the pendant, no problem. But the bigger the pendant is, the more likely then it'll end up just sort of getting bent. That's what jump rings are for, is to release pressure. You know what I mean? So that if things can move around, then they don't break. So that's kind of why, literally like the whole reason that jump rings exist. And although I have made many a pendant with a rigid bail and that's all good, it's just always good, I feel like, to think about that like, oh, you know, maybe it's better for it to be able to swing a little bit. Okay, and also depends how hard you wear your jewelry. But so what we're gonna do is we've got this cute little cut in half, and also here's the secret to doing the little half jump ring. It's not a half, it's 2/3. If you cut it in half, even though you think that that's beautiful, the proportion isn't good. Do you know what I'm saying? So what I normally do is you make your jump ring, you solder it shut, because you know you're never gonna get it beautiful and round if you don't solder it shut first. Sucks, but just let go of it, because it's not a thing that you can do without that. Then I usually just take out just where the original seam was. I just kind of take my scissors. I can either just, if the circle's right here, or if you want to be really fancy and you're putting it on something that's really pointed, you can actually take your nippers and take a little section out of the circle. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well enough. If you're all visualizing in my mind, here's the jump ring, and you can do like that. So it just depends on your piece, and this is just a lovely smooth oval, so we don't need to do anything that complicated.
But I did a little bit because it wasn't
Yes.
needed.
Yeah. Well, also it's just the whole thing, there's no right answer that this is how you have to do it with stuff like this, but it just has to look good. If you look at that little thing and it looks lovely, you have succeeded. If it looks weird, you need to go back to the drawing board. You know what I'm saying? And usually for me, I find it's because you need 2/3, not half. It looks much nicer. Okay? So that all being said, we also want this to be sort of in the middle of our bail. In the middle of our bezel. So we want it about right there. And now it's not that there is anything wrong, and we often do, put it right there, but sometimes then it tends to kind of tilt away from the body, so I want to have it, a little further away because the bail is going to be larger, and then it sort of rests against the body a little bit nicer. So what we're going to do then is we're going to squish this into a magnesia block, which is just a soft block, so that I can get this at exactly the right spot. We could also use a third arm, but as we all know, third arm is a big pain in the butt when you're trying to arrange something that's exactly like boo, you know what I mean? We use them when we have to, but they're a pain. So usually for something like this, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take 2 big fat Jewelry Arts dowels, and we're gonna press it down in there. That if I go into, plug voice, what's happening. The dowel, you're gonna love it. Because here's the thing, you don't want to distort this when you're pushing it in there. So that's why it actually matters that you get 2 large dowels and sort of press it evenly. In other words, if I took one little thing and was just okay, here I go, you could distort this, and you don't want to do that. Susie's looking at me horrified.
No, I was going to say I have
Can I have more?
I have an old big one.
Can I have whatever you got there? I'll just creepily stroke the dowel as we wait for that.
It's not as lovely as that one, but
it's just, the point is, when you're using materials that are not super thick and heavy, you just have to think about that. You can't take some small thing and poke it in one spot and expect it to stay level. Just keep that in mind. Okay? So, although one other thing I'm gonna do real fast, get a piece of green paper. I'm just gonna sand the back here. I tend to be a big believer in everything should be at a 400 finish before you stick anything else to it. Because cleanup, as we all know, sucks. And it's always easier to clean up something before you have something else attached to it that kind of gets in your way. I mean, it looks lovely. Just
My lovely
needs
case
a little
of.
zhuzh. Beautiful. I
I was
love
afraid
it.
that I would get it too thin, so I didn't do that, but, right.
I mean,
green
yes, you
paint
can't sand all day, but we just want to give it a little spiff. See, like all pretty. And just get the center a little bit. And as always, it's not about perfect, but it's just the tidier you work as you go along, the less agita you have later.
I love how this is the Social Security.
It's recycling at its finest. So, of course, I'm going to put this bezel side down because this would be a hell of a lot harder to push this in, you know, solid. I mean, we'd have to like dig it out and everything, and I don't want to do that. So, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to press and press, like, you see what I mean? And I'm leaning in. And I'll probably do it a little more, but basically I do it until that'll line up. So it needs to be a little lower than that. You have to mark it beforehand. Otherwise you stick this in here, you have no idea what's happening. I mean, it's just, you know, who knows what height it's at. So I'm gonna stop when that line is like just above the surface. I'm gonna press in a little harder. I need to eat my Wheaties today. I've been known to use a leather mallet, but do that with caution. I think that might be just a hair more, but you see what I'm doing, right? I'm just kind of lining that up. And I want to press this in nice and evenly because the whole point of this is that I don't have to put that little guy in a third arm and be very aggravated getting it all lined up, just so. Tiny bit more. And you just don't want it to end up too close to the top of the bezel because then it's going to be a pain in the ass when you try to set. Just a little more. OCD, it's fun for you and me.
Fresh block is down.
Yes, it is. Okay, there you go. That's what I want it to be. Okay, so I'm also gonna like look at it from the top. And maybe Alexis, if you don't mind, you could just like kind of look over my shoulder because you see how I'm just tilting it and looking down at it to see that it's lined up nice and straight. I can also take a little Sharpie mark. A lot of times I do that from the top and just put a little mark there to help me visualize, because the fact of the matter is ovals are very rarely like a perfect oval. It's just the oval of your stone or, you know, whatever it is. You can also draw the crosshairs on here if you want, which helps you to line things up. Basically, any little straight thing that you draw helps you to see. So like to me, I think that looks pretty good.
That looks great.
Because then I just put it facing me so that I can see everything relatively easily. And you know, a really important thing with stuff like this is do one side at a time. You do both sides at once. While you're looking at the one side, the other side does something naughty and you're like, oh! So I have learned that actually I can only pay attention to one thing at a time, despite what I tell myself. So I'm gonna cut some pretty small little pieces and I'm gonna ball them up. She has some pieces there, but you know what a fussy twit I am, and I like to make my own. Okay, so I've got my cute little balls of solder. I got my paste flux all whipped up so that it's nice and soupy, because I'm just gonna put like a little dot of this right where they would touch. And I'm also gonna put it on the other side, because do I wanna stop in between this and pickle and then set it all back up again? No, I do not. So if I keep both seams clean by putting flux there, usually after I flow the one side, I just directly go and do the other side. Okay, a little of that. I'm gonna dry the flux just a little bit. And then usually I just dip my ball in a little bit of flux, and because this is warm, it tends to just stick right on there. You know, and Susie was asking before, like maybe it should be a 00, and I'm like, no, like look at this big bezel. Like we've got to kind of get that hot. Like I think a 0 is better. 00 I think just might be a little too dainty for our purposes. Okay, there's my little ball. There was my little ball. Where did you go? Up next, the mystery of the disappearing solder. So I'm gonna just try that again. Okay, you all see that, right? There's the solder. Oh, there, I found it. You know, the hardest part about soldering like this is just not getting frustrated when these little balls slide around and disappear, because they will. And just remember that the soldering itself will only take like 15 seconds. It's getting all of this in the right spot. That's so aggravating. There we go. Okay, so you see our cute little ball right there? Now, so the really important thing to remember, if you haven't heard this from me before, when you're soldering something little to something big, the heat has to be on the big thing. You heat up the little jump ring or the little post or whatever it is, it gets too hot, the solder wants to run onto it, and you can also melt it if you really go crazy. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be positioning my heat right here. The jump ring is gonna get hot just by being in the neighborhood, and as this gets hot, you'll see it'll melt and it'll kind of sink right in there. And I always have my tweezers ready because, you know, flux, bubbles, and things move around, but. And then as soon as that side's done, I'll just add a piece to the other side. Just a tiny bit. Sounds like it has naughty intentions. So you see how my heat is on the bezel, you know, it's on the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
My tweezers are here in case that little piece of solder does something naughty. See that? I'm gonna let Alexis do a tiny close-up of that. And then because normally, like I said, then I'm just gonna throw the other piece right on and go ahead and do it.
With a little flux.
Yep, exactly. Because that's what I want. I want no cleanup. I want just it to fill in that seam. I mean, that's everything that I'm looking for. So do you want me to do the other side as a demo? Yes. So, and again, I'm gonna heat kind of over here mainly. And I've got my tweezers ready in case it does something naughty, but you see how I've got my little piece of solder there, right up against. Because you just have to make sure that the bezel is hotter or the same temperature as the jump ring. Because the jump ring is little, so that's easy to get that real hot. So you have to sort of just let it get hot by being in the neighborhood rather than the focus of the flame. Okay? So you let it cool, throw in the pickle, and we'll take a look at it. But usually when I do it this way, I don't have any cleanup, which as you know is my goal in life. So there you go, we'll look at it, and then when we're done, as long as you're sure this looks good. A lot of times, honestly, I don't even pickle because I want that to be dirty when I do the other one. Oh. But like, take it out, look at it. As long as we can clearly see that it's done and good, I won't pickle. But sometimes you can't really see what's what and you want to pickle. So either way is fine.
Okay.
Okay?
And when we put